Nancy, thank you for being here. And let me ask, first of all, your reaction to the fact that Angela Corey is not going to go to the grand jury with this.
Well, there are two ways that they can charge Zimmerman if they choose to do that. One is by using a grand jury. I myself always used a grand jury. The other way is by using an accusation, as it is called in many jurisdictions. That is simply when the prosecutor, who has the full indicia of reliability and the backing of the law and the Constitution, can simply get a piece of paper like this and write up the charge. I hereby sworn as an assistant district attorney, state's attorney, do hereby charge George Zimmerman with murder 1, or whatever charge they think is appropriate, sign it and date it, and file it at the clerk's office. It's just that simple to write up an accusation. A grand jury also is not a difficult feat. A grand jury in that jurisdiction, Florida, typically meets on Tuesdays and Thursdays. At that time, Angela Corey could bring in as few as one witness, preferably a detective who is familiar with all the evidence. Hearsay is allowed at the grand jury, and that detective could state what everyone has told him, every single witness, what he or she observed, and ask the grand jury to hand down a true bill. Either way, I think that this case will most likely end up in a criminal charge. It will then go where it belongs, to a petit jury, a jury of 12, as opposed to a grand jury, which is a jury typically of 20 to 40 voters or citizens.
Okay, so who are you talking to tonight to get more information on this, and what do you want them to answer?
Well, we are investigating whether there will be a grand jury, what the charge will most likely be. Will it be a murder 1 or a lesser charge, such as voluntary or involuntary manslaughter? I think it would be best if there is an indictment to charge on murder 1. That way, a Florida jury of 12 could determine the appropriate charge, be it involuntary, voluntary murder, or nothing. They could determine self-defense was used, but frankly, that's an issue for a jury, not for the police.
Well, you know, have been a prosecutor, obviously, Nancy. I'm wondering, there's so much public pressure in this case. How does a prosecutor handle that and balance it with what needs to be done?
Frankly, public pressure, be damned. You take an oath as a prosecutor to do the right thing, not to listen to everybody screaming on the sidewalk, but to listen to what is true and what is correct. And in this case, you've got a dead body of an unarmed 17-year-old. Therefore, this needs to go to a grand jury and then on to a jury for them to determine the truth. Not for the police to decide, but for a jury to decide.
Well, Zimmerman, of course, says it was self-defense. And I know the burden of proof, when you go to trial, the burden of proof is on the prosecution to prove their case. But once you've got a defendant claiming self-defense, what do they need to do to prove that defense?
That's a very good question, and a question that many jurors ask. When you go to trial and the defendant says, yes, I did it, but here's why, you should excuse me and acquit me, that is called an affirmative defense. Like insanity, like accident, like self-defense, where the perp says, yes, I did it. I did this thing. I did the shooting, but excuse me because it was self-defense. Self-defense is a complete defense under the law. That's a nutshell for the law in this case. So the defense takes on an affirmative defense to show self-defense, but the burden is still on the prosecution to make their case of murder or voluntary manslaughter, whichever they choose. But I really predict an indictment, a decision is going to go down, I would imagine, within the next 72 hours.
And again, just to clarify, what do you think, if you're foreseeing charges, what do you think they would be?
I think they're going to go with something safe. I would bet voluntary. I think it's going to be an accusation, as it is called in many jurisdictions, which is a formal charge that will go to a jury, but not by the use of grand jury. I think that Angela Corey or someone in her office will draw up an indictment and file it. And I think that it will go to a jury. And there we're going to hear the full story of self-defense because, you know, I kept interviewing friends and spokespeople for Zimmerman, and they kept saying, the truth is going to come out. You're going to hear the whole story. I'm like, hey, tell me now. I want to hear the whole story right now. Never heard it.
Don't we all? I know. We're waiting on that. Nancy, thank you so much. So good to get your insight and perspective as always.